Welcome everybody to Stingray's webinar this month. We are exploring macro photography, which is a new topic for the Stingray webinar series. And our presenter tonight is Andrew McLachlan. By way of introduction, Andrew is a freelance photographer and writer from Ontario, Canada, with a fascination of the natural world. He enjoys hiking along dense boreal forest trails, canoeing through wetlands, and observing all that nature has to offer. Extensive travels throughout Ontario have resulted in a large, diverse collection of images that feature landscapes and the flora and fauna of the province. In addition to photographing Ontario's natural world, he also has a growing collection of Caribbean-related photos and artistic renditions of his favorite images using a variety of Photoshop techniques. Andrew's first ebook was A Photographer's Guide to the Ontario Landscape. It was the first ever comprehensive guide to photographing Ontario's vast and varied landscape. There are many outstanding photo descriptions throughout the province. In this ebook, he covers many of the best locations from remote Abitibi Canyon to Point Pelée and the Ottawa Valley to the Agama Highlands and beyond, in an easy to read, easy to follow guide, complete with driving directions to each destination, which I love. His newly released ebook, Focus on Frogs, an illustrated guide to great photography, is a comprehensive guide to photographing frogs and toads in the wild, in the tropics, in homemade terrariums, and in studio setups. And I'm so excited to hear from you tonight, Andrew. If you want to go ahead and take it from here.
Thanks very much, Michelle. I just want to thank the folks at Stingray Filters for asking me to present this macro photography program of mine to everybody. I've been doing photography for quite a number of years, probably, I guess, about 30, 35 years. I first started out doing macro photography, mostly just photographing woodland flowers, wildflowers, that type of stuff with a very old Minolta X700 and a manual 100 millimeter macro lens. And then after that, as I started to upgrade my camera gear, I ended up switching over to Nikon. I'm still with Nikon equipment today. I became more of a landscape photographer for quite a number of years, and then just sort of photographing whatever wildlife I'd encounter while I was out in the field doing my landscape photography. And then I've always had an interest in macro photography. I didn't do it a lot. But then in the summer of 2020, I had to have a bit of a surgical procedure, and I was just recovering at home with limited mobility. I live in a rural property, about a half an acre. And I thought, I'm just, with the limited mobility, I can go outside and just walk around for, 15 minutes, half an hour, and see what insects I can find and start working on my macro photography a bit more. And from there, I just I started doing it more and more and more. And in the summer months when the insects are active, I'm usually out in the yard several times a day looking to see what can be found. And it's really quite amazing when you actually take the time to just stop and look a little bit closer, just what you can find out there just on your own property. So some of the topics we'll cover tonight are macro lenses, diffusing a flash. I've gone through several different flash types and arrived at what I'm using now, and that's probably what I'll use for the foreseeable future because I'm quite pleased with the setup that I've got now. Finding subjects, where you can look to find different subjects, whether it's insects or patterns in nature, that type of stuff. Tips for focusing extreme macro at handheld. And by this, I mean, when you start getting up into, like the 2 times life size or even up to 5 times life size. Handheld focus stacking. It sounds a little bit more difficult than it is, but it isn't really that difficult to do a handheld focus stack. I don't do big extensive focus stacks. I tend to keep it in between maybe 3 to 5 pictures just to get the a little bit more depth of field on the part of that subject that I want to. Say if it's an insect and I just want to get a little bit more depth of field across the insect's head, then I might do a quick 3 image or 5 image focus stack. And just a quick overview on my post-production workflow, how I process my pictures. I use Photoshop for all of my processing. I never really dove into Lightroom, so I've just stuck with Photoshop for all of my post-production work. So the macro lenses that I use, when I did switch from my Minolta gear to Nikon, I had a Nikon macro. It was the old non-VR version, autofocus macro. And I used that for a number of years. It would focus to life size. And I would use the supplementary diopters that Nikon used to make. I had a 5T diopter and a 6T diopter that I could put on the front of that lens to gain a little bit more magnification. I never really got a lot of good results doing some of the stuff with my Nikon macro and the diopters. I got some that was really good, but I would use a tripod quite often. And although it's good, the tripod, to help keep things steady, I do find by hand holding and using flash, I'm able to get a lot better results. The Laowa, I did try out a Laowa 100 millimeter 2x macro lens, and I liked it so much. After my initial pictures, I purchased the lens from Laowa and I sold my Nikon lens off. And it's quite surprising, you know, the Laowa lenses they're fully manual. They're about half the price of the like Nikon, Canon, or Sony type lenses. So you can save a lot of money, and they're razor sharp lenses. After I used the 100, then I got Laowa's 15 millimeter wide angle macro, which is also goes down to life size, 1:1. You can focus as close to the front element. I think it's about 4.7 millimeters. So you can get really crazy close to the front of the glass on that lens. And with the 15 millimeter focal length, you can really have a subject like a frog or something dominating the foreground, but still see the whole habitat that animal is living in. And then a recent purchase I did this just past summer was the Laowa 25 millimeter 2.5 to 5 times life-size macro. And that's really a niche lens, but it's kind of handy. It's very inexpensive. I think it's $340 at B&H, something around that price range. Very small, like 3.5, 4-inch lens. And it's just a nice lens to have either in pocket or in your gear bag for those times when you might want to just get something a little bit more extreme. The picture we have up here on this slide, it's a female goldenrod spider. And these spiders, they can be, I've seen them yellow or white. They sort of change their color depending on the flower that they're on. And this one was just on some clover along the rural road that I live on. And all I did to photograph this one was with the Laowa 100 millimeter macro lens. And I just held the blossom that the spider was on the clover and just moved it in to steady it to get a nice close-up shot of it. And one of the things I like with macro is you also have an opportunity to incorporate a lot of color in your picture. So with this spider, you know, by getting in really close, I was able to fill the background and everything with that pinkish purple from the clover flower, and just really just nice saturation there with the yellow spider and then the pink flower.
We have a good question here. Do I really need a macro lens to do good macro photography? And what makes a macro lens?
You don't really have to have a macro lens. I do have a little supplementary lens that'll be in one of the other slides coming up. It's made by a company called Raynox, and I will use that on my Laowa 100 millimeter sometimes because it will make that Laowa lens almost a 4 times macro. And it's just a little supplementary diopter that you can just clip on the front of a lens. And I'm not 100% sure how wide of like filter size you can go to. My Laowa lens is a 67 millimeter. I think they go up to maybe a little bigger than 67. You'd have to check the specs on them to see. But yeah, like if you had a kit zoom lens with say a 67 millimeter filter size, you could easily get one of these Raynox diopters. They're about $89, I believe, from B&H. And you can put that on the front of your lens and you'll be able to focus much, much closer. Canon used to make, I believe it's discontinued, but Canon used to have a 500D close-up filter. And I would sometimes use that on my Nikon 80 to 400 millimeter lens. And without the filter, that lens would focus about 7.5 feet, I believe it was. But when you put that Canon close-up filter on, I could focus down on frogs, about the size of 1 inch and capture those with that 80 to 400 millimeter lens, because it would get the lens to focus so much closer. And I have seen quite a few of those Canon 500D filters on eBay. So there's quite a few of them around.
And then when you're doing focus stacking, how do you focus and take 3 to 5 shots if the subject or the insect is moving?
Well, typically I use subjects that aren't really moving too much. The slides I have coming up, there's one with a ladybug larva, and it's not moving, it's on a leaf. So I'm able to just hold that leaf and just steady myself to capture those 3 pictures or 5 pictures, whatever number I think I might need.
And then do you know why the eyes are a different color on this spider?
No, I don't. The seems like the outer 2 eyes there are always dark, and then the inner 2 are a little bit lighter in color. And then there's some more eyes up on top of the head, just sort of, you can see a couple little spots up. I guess you can see my cursor. Could you just up? There's one there,
Yeah.
and I think the other ones are back over here, if I remember correctly. Okay. Then this one I'll go, when I get to my flash thing, I'll go through all the different flashes I have used. This one here used the Laowa twin macro light with some homemade diffusers on it. And I'll show you those home diffusers in an upcoming slide as well. Here we go. So the lighting options that I use for my macro photography, this sort of goes through a little bit of a history of how I arrived at the flash that I use now, which is the one in the lower right there, that Cygnus Tech diffuser with a Godox flash in the hot shoe. That's on a D500, Nikon D500. So in the upper left, my very first setup was using an old Nikon SB400, just a small little flash, fits in the palm of your hand. And I would just use that as a bare flash, usually with frogs and toads at night in the ponds when they're chorusing up this way. But the bare flash, you get a lot of spectral highlights off of, glossy skin on a frog or say a shiny beetle. And I would spend a lot of time, touching up those blown out spectral highlights. So then I started with my old Nikon SB600 flash, and I put some diffusing material over it. Now that's the diffusing material I use, and it's very cheap. If you when you buy do-it-yourself assemble furniture, sometimes the slats of wood in the furniture pack are separated with that thin sheets of foam, and that's all this is, polystyrene foam sheeting. So over the flash, I believe I have 3 pieces of the styrofoam sheeting over the flash, held on with a bit of duct tape, and then hooked onto the flash just with an elastic here. It's an old peanut butter jar that I cut and warmed up in some hot boiling water and just sort of reshaped it a bit. And then I draped 3 more sheets of that polystyrene foam over that reshaped peanut butter jar. And that just sort of helps hold that concave shape there of the foam. So the flash is firing through a bit of diffuser, and then it's going through the other diffuser. And I would get a lot of, the pictures I would get would have very little spectral highlights from the flash. The only problem I started to find is it's a little bit cumbersome to use that in the field. But it did work very well for frogs. I wasn't too crazy on how it worked for the insects. And then after that, I switched to this system over here on the upper right. And the flash setup is this Meek MKMT24 wireless macro twin flash. And that was purchased off Amazon. I believe it was $3.99 Canadian dollars when I did purchase that one. And it was dedicated for the Nikon system. It just used AA batteries and AAA batteries. The Nikon version, one of the units needs the special button type batteries. So I just like this system. It was half the price of the Nikon one. It used common batteries that are easy to find anywhere when I need to. And I made some homemade diffusers for it. Again, just these are out of a couple of small Rubbermaid containers with a hole cut in the back to fit over the flash. And then just a bit of duct tape and some of the polystyrene foam sheeting to just cover up the opening so the flash is going through the diffusing material. And again, I would have used at least, I think, 4 sheets of the polystyrene foam sheeting, 4 layers over that Rubbermaid bin. And then that's all being supported by a Wimberley F2 dual arm macro bracket. The Meek system does come with a adapter that allows you to fit those flashes onto the front of the lens. But by the time you put some sort of homemade diffusion device on there to really diffuse the light properly, then you're getting almost too big to even position the flashes without interfering with the picture. So I wanted to get those flash units off to the sides by using the macro brackets. And this system is nice. It's a little bit heavier, but there's no cables to get in the way. It's all through radio transmitter to the flash units from the commander that sits on top in the hot shoe. As with my old system over here on the left, you have that the flash sync cord. So this system was a little bit easier, a bit heavier, but nice without any of the cords. And then I decided I wanted to try the Laowa macro twin light, which we see down here. And this I found it's great for night photography. I use this still when I use my 2.5 to 5 times macro lens, just because I can really get those flash tubes out where I need them to. It's a little bit, awkward looking with the big flash arms, but it is very light. The center little light right here, that's a little LED focusing light, which comes in quite handy if you're photographing at night. You get that light to illuminate your subject so you can focus on the subject, because don't forget, I'm using these Laowa lenses and they're fully manual, so I have to manually focus. I'm not relying on autofocus for them at all. And then, so again, the bare flash tubes, I needed to make some sort of a diffuser for them. So I used a couple of bottoms from 2-liter milk cartons and lined them with some foil tape from the hardware store. And then again, 4 layers of the polystyrene foam sheeting, just held onto those milk cartons with some duct tape. And that works really well. I was able to eliminate pretty well all spectral highlights using it. You'd sometimes get the odd one here and there. Oh, excuse me, the odd one here and there, but it worked quite well. And I do like that system. But then I just doing like some Google searches and looking up different macro photographers on the internet and seeing what they use and looking at people on Instagram. There's some guys doing some really incredible macro work. And a lot of them are using diffusers, much like this Cygnus Tech one down in the lower right corner here. And what I like about this, it folds down flat, so I can easily put it in my camera bag. All the other systems, it was kind of like, well, I need to pack all these, the dual arm setup that I'm going to need. The Laowa twin macro light, it doesn't really fit in the gear bag very easily, so I have to carry it loose or keep it on the camera, which becomes a little bit awkward. But this Cygnus Tech diffuser folding down perfectly flat and just sliding into the laptop pocket of my camera bag, it was perfect. And I use the Godox flash. The model I use is the VC860II for the Nikon. They have come out with a 3rd version of it, but I have the Mark II version. And what I like about that flash is the battery. It already comes with a a lithium battery pack in it that's just rechargeable. So there's no more purchasing of AA batteries or whatever other kind of batteries. It's just a rechargeable battery that's already in the flash itself. So it's makes travel a little bit easier if you can just have the lithium battery pack for charging. And this is my go-to flash now for everything. I do find with that, there is literally no spectral highlights at all to worry about. So I don't have to worry about doing some cloning or fancy Photoshop work to get rid of some little spectral highlights that really take your attention away from the photo.
So what is your experience with LED panels, good and bad, instead of flash, such as the RGB Lume Cube panel, 6" by 3" for under 200?
I've never used them. I think if you're working on a tripod and you want get some light up under things, I've seen them work in those aspects, and they seem to be quite good from what I've seen with the results. Um, a lot of times when I'm photographing insects and stuff, I want to be able to freeze the motion of them moving, and you need that, quick burst from the flash, I find, to freeze the motion of the insect as it's moving.
And does the Cygnus diffuser fit on any speed light?
Yes, yeah. And the fellow that makes this, he's in Australia, and you can just, if you go on Instagram, and um, I think his name for his username on Instagram is just Cygnus Tech. If you just put that in, you'll find him. Some incredible macro work that he does. So I had just contacted him through Instagram, and I believe the price was in Australian dollars, if I'm not mistaken. I think it may have been $120. And real nice guy to work with. Just PayPal to him for the diffuser, and it took about, I think, 2.5, 3 weeks to get to me here in Ontario. He does have some other options for it if you wanted to get a light built into it inside for night photography. He can add that in for an extra bit. I already had some solutions, so I didn't really need that part of it. But yeah, and it will fit with any flash and pretty much any camera macro setup that you use, really.
And is the Cygnus good for both 65mm and 100mm macro lenses?
I do believe it will work with the 65mm macro. You could always just check with him when you do reach out to him. The way it holds on to the front is just a little step-up ring, and then there's an elastic sort of elastic cord that just goes under that step-up ring, so it doesn't slide off the front of the element, or the front of the lens rather.
And do you use that same setup for night macro photography as there's no focus light?
Yes, I do. I have a little focus light that I can fit inside it that helps. And sometimes I just have a little small mini mag light that I have with me as well, that I can put that sort of in the palm of my hand while I'm holding the lens barrel. So it'll add just a little extra light there for me to see if I need it.
And do you use the same diffuser for all the shots, or do you need to change the thickness or intensity at all?
No, you don't. The front of the diffuser, it really looks almost like an opaque um, piece of white plastic sheeting type stuff, but the flash does go through it. It eliminates all the spectral highlights. Most of the pictures in this presentation were done with that, and you'll see just how the lighting is with them. It does give a little bit of a warmer light, I find, with my Nikon, but I haven't done anything like setting up any sort of a different white balance. I usually just leave my white balance at auto on my D500, and if I need to in camera raw, I'll just tweak the white balance if I need to.
And is it necessary to put a diffuser using the SP600? Do you have to decrease the strength or of the flash for macro photography?
No, I don't decrease the flash unless I always review the histogram. So if the histogram's telling me that I'm a little bit too hot with the flash, then I can back it off a little bit. But the diffusion material, it holds back quite a bit of the flash, I find. And the way I have that, the setup with this SB600, I will lose some flash out to the, lose some light out to the sides, because it's not sort of contained like it is with the Cygnus Tech, where there's a hood over the flash. The other thing I like about that Cygnus Tech, just speaking of the hood, I find it actually works as a rain cover if you're out in the rain, because it keeps the rain really off of your flash and off the lens. So it's actually beneficial in that regard too, when you're out doing some macro in the rain, if you are. So here we are. So where to find subjects? You can find them just about anywhere. You know, fields you can find them in, just roadside ditches. I do a lot of mine in the ditches just along my rural road that I live on. Flower blossoms in the garden. A lot of the predator type insects like spiders or this little jagged ambush bug that we have here. He's actually sitting on a just a common milkweed leaf, but I've had pictures of them on like oxeye daisies. I found them in the clover blossoms, in the garden on coneflowers. They're a very small bug, maybe about a centimeter long, um, but they're quite the efficient predator. They can tackle prey that's about 10 times their size with they have a venom that's quite potent on the other insects, so they can really immobilize much larger prey if they need to. So these are, I never even knew I had these around here till I actually started taking a little more time in doing some macro photography, and then start finding all these different and unique insects that are literally right out your front door almost. Tree trunks are another good spot for things like spiders. I know right here at my house, I'll see a lot of like the daddy long leg type spiders just hiding out in the tree bark during the day. I've found some jumping spiders on the tree bark. Crab spiders. Sometimes I'll get the robber flies resting on the bark during the day. So it's just lots of you have to get up and sort of look a little bit close at the bark, and you'll just see all sorts of stuff. Vegetable gardens can be a good spot too. I mean, we don't want certain pests in our vegetable gardens because they'll eat up some of our vegetables, but you can get some really colorful beetles on even in the vegetable garden, like the black and yellow striped cucumber beetles, those types. We mentioned flower blossoms, so flower garden is sort of similar, but just looking around in your garden for different stuff. And even inside your home, you can find some insects or spiders every now and then. I'll find a little jumping spider running across the ceiling in my house or something. So I'll try to catch them, and I'll get a little scrap or small piece of bark from outside and try to get them onto the bark, and get a few pictures of them in just on a table. But it looks like a total natural setting, just having them on the bark because they're quite small. And then after I'm done taking pictures, I'll let them outside because my wife doesn't want a spider running around the house for me to take pictures of.
So how do you get the black background on that shot?
Okay, that one there is, it was a bright sunny day, but there's nothing for the flash to fall on. It's just shooting off into the air, nothing in the immediate background. So the background will go black in that situation. If the leaf, I held the leaf up a little bit just to purposely get that black background. If the leaf was held down towards the grasses, you would get more of an out of focus green from the different grasses in the ditch with the flash to fall on those. But this particular one, I wanted to get a little bit more of a dramatic effect with the black background and really make that ambush bug stand out nicely.
And is that a stacked shot or single?
No, that is a single shot at f/16. I've only done 3 handheld focus stacks with my macro work. They're all the 3 of them are in this presentation, all on one slide. So every other picture you will see is a single shot. Usually I'm at f/16. Sometimes I go down to f/22. I know some people talk about diffraction. You start getting a little bit of unsharpness when you get down to f/22. But I sometimes find I get very acceptable results at f/22, especially with my Laowa 100 millimeter lens. When I go to the 2.5 to 5 times Laowa macro lens, then that's one where you need to stay a little bit more wide open in around the f/5.6. I don't usually go down below f/8 just because of the, as you get greater magnification, then your f-stop becomes much lower than f/8. It's a little, I find it confusing to sort of think about it, but if you went down to f/16 on that lens, it's just far too small of an f-stop, and you will see a lot of unsharpness with diffraction. So with that particular lens, I do stay a little bit more wide open at f5.6 or f8. I think f8 at 5 times life size is the equivalent of about f32, I believe. So I try not to go down too low on that lens. And this jag and ambush bug was used with the Laowa twin macro light with the two big flashes on those flexible arms with the diffusers. And you can see that's a lot of nice diffusion by using some homemade diffusers. A lot of the macro work can be improved immensely by just getting some nice diffusion on those flashes. This little spider, he was on the side of my house, and I had a little piece of a branch with some various different types of lichen on it, and I just kind of coaxed the spider onto the lichen. It was at night, just outside the front door, and I was just holding the spider on the branch and just sort of lining up different compositions and grabbing some pictures of them. And this here was with the Cygnus Tech diffuser, and it's just a real nice soft light. Those it diffuses it so nicely. You get all the areas where you think there would be dark shadows. Like if you used a single bare flash, you would have some really dark shadows underneath that spider, and it wouldn't be near as pleasing. But with the Cygnus Tech diffuser, the light's diffused really nice, and it opens up underneath the spider, those shadow areas. There's no spectral highlights at all. And as I said, it can act as a rain protector. So this was done with my Nikon D500 with the 100 millimeter macro, the Laowa. And so that 100 millimeter macro on the Nikon D500, it's the equivalent of about 150 millimeter lens on the in say 35 millimeter or full frame format, because the D500 is the crop sensor. So a lot of times I use my D500 for the crop sensor because it gives me a little bit of extra length on the lens. I do have a D800, excuse me, that I use sometimes as well, but I tend to go for the D500 for my macro work more often. And that's with the Godox flash. This one I stopped down to f22 just to get a little bit more depth of field. I wanted to get, I always focus on the eyes. And when I'm shooting a single frame, f16 or f22, I always want to focus on the eye. And then for me, whatever else falls in focus, great. Whatever doesn't, so be it. If the eye is in focus, I'm happy. But you can see here, this he had a really nice big abdomen, and that f22, the eyes in focus, and the hairs here on the abdomen are quite nice and sharp and in focus as well. I like to use this slide of these autumn ferns. I believe it was interrupted fern. It's turning yellow, dying as winter's starting to approach. It was a rainy day. And this is sort of the way I like to just sort of prove how good the diffusion is with that Cygnus Tech diffuser. This is pretty much straight out of the camera. Very little Photoshop work done to it, a little bit of just contrast adjustment. But you can see it was a rainy day. That fern is all wet, and there is no blown out spectral highlights from the from the water on that fern. If I had used some of my older setups or just a bare flash, there would be a lot of blown out spectral highlights that would be kind of annoying. So this is kind of my testament that I like to just say to how good I think that diffuser is. And again, I went this one here, I went f22 just to make sure, because that fern frond is not perfectly flat. The leaves and that are not all in the same plane as the sensor on the camera. So at this close focus, I went to f22 just to help ensure that I had, sharpness from corner to corner in the composition. And this is a Cuban tree frog. I just photographed this back in the end of December, just around Christmas time, down on Grand Cayman when I was there for a couple of weeks. And this one here, This Cuban tree frog is probably about 2 inches long. You can see that's the diffuser in the frog's eye. I'm okay with that though. If it bothered you, you could do a little cloning of and clean some of that up a little bit if you needed to. But again, this shows how good that diffusion is. In my old flash setups that I would use, there'd be a lot of spectral highlights along the nose there of the frogs. And up here on the eye, there would be some spectral highlights. Usually you'd end up with some down in along the legs there. But you can see here where the flash is hitting the frog and creating the brightness, you can still see there's detail in there. There's no blown out highlights. So I really like that flash diffuser for that purpose, and the frog's glossy skin. It just eliminates so much time in Photoshop. And to photograph this guy, it was at night. So I just had used a mini mag flashlight in the palm of my left hand while I'm cradling the macro lens. It's manual, and the mag light gives me enough light to put on the frog to focus, and then just fire away a few frames. That Godox flash recycles really quickly. That was another reason why I went to the Godox flash, because it does recycle quite quickly. I found that Meek dual twin light as well as the Laowa twin light, I'd be waiting a couple of seconds for it to recycle. But with the Godox, you can just, boom, 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 fire it off. And if you're going to do a handheld focus stack, you want to get those pictures in quick. Instead of, take a picture, wait 3 seconds for the flash to recycle, take the next one. By then your insect might be moved off somewhere different, so the focus stack isn't really going to work. But when you have the flash that can fire that quickly, I like the Godox, then you can nail those, 3, 4, 5 frames that you might need for the stack quite quickly.
I don't know if you have an example, but can you explain a little bit more about spectral diffusion and like what the difference would be if you did have it?
Of the which, sorry, the stack?
Spectral diffusion?
Diffraction, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Diffraction, I don't understand it 100%. I've just kind of do what works for me. And if, F22 works for me, then I use F22 when I need to. Some people are quite particular and they like to not go down to F22 for their macro work, because the diffraction is supposed to create some softness in the picture so you won't get as sharp a result. At F16, the theory is you get a much sharper result than you do at F22. But I think there's some situations where you need to stop down to that F22 a little bit more. And that's what I did with this little cluster of garden spiders. I don't know what species they were exactly. Probably the little cross orb reaver spiders that I've showed previously. But this little ball of spiders was about maybe, not even an inch round. And there's just, there's hundreds of spiders in that little cluster. And I did use a supplementary lens, the Raynox DCR 250 diopter on my Laowa 100 millimeter macro lens. I was using the D800 at this time. And so we're at almost 4 times life size here to fill the frame with all these little spiders. And by going down to F22, I ensured I'd get, a good amount of sharpness throughout the composition. And really this picture was just a matter of taking several frames over and over, just till I got one where there was a nice amount of spiders sort of all on the same focus plane. So there'd be some good sharpness, like the one up here in the upper left, the center ones here, this one over here on the right's in focus. So I just wanted to make sure I had enough of a arrangement of in focus spiders, because a lot of the ones, they're out of focus. When you get up to the 4 times macro, your depth of field becomes very minuscule. So I went to F22 to maximize whatever I could for that situation.
So in general, how far is your lens from your subject?
When I'm the Laowa lens at 2 times, I believe I am within about 5 centimeters or so from the subject.
Okay.
When I put on a close-up diopter, I'm getting in quite a bit closer. So as I mentioned at the beginning there, a simple cost-effective way to get greater magnification is this Raynox supplementary lens. And you can see there in the little picture there, there's a couple of push buttons on the side. So you just push those in and put it over the front of the lens, let go of those push buttons, and then the springs inside will just lock that little supplementary lens into the thread mounts, the filter threads on the front of the lens. So it's really easy, to be able to, if you don't want to have a real super macro lens, like one that goes to 5 times life size, if you have a 100mm macro lens and you get the Raynox, it can just easily fit in the shirt pocket. And then if you need to use it, you pop it out, put it on the front of the lens, and there you got a 4 times macro lens ready to go. And the 250 is, they make 3 models. One's quite strong. I've never tried that. They have a DCR 150, which I do have. I haven't used it very often. And then the DCR 250, which I have used quite often, and it's quite handy. If you don't like the design of the push button attachment to the lens, you can always get the thread mount on that filter that it screws into. The threads that screw into the holder is 43mm. So you can always get a step down ring, which I do have a step down ring, a 67mm step down to 43mm, and then you can just screw that onto the front of the lens without the little push tabs. If you do back the lens off to say a 1/4 life size, you are going to get vignetting because the filter is, that supplementary lens is much smaller than the diameter of the lens. But if you're up around 1 times or 2 times life size, there is no vignetting with that little Raynox attached to the front of the lens. Here's a little example of using that supplementary lens on the 100mm macro. This little grasshopper I found on the gravel road, not too far from my house. He was probably, I'm going to guess, about maybe 3/4 of an inch long, the grasshopper, quite small, very well blended in with the gravel. So the image on the left where you see the whole grasshopper, it was done with my Nikon D800, the Laowa 100mm macro with the Meek twin flash setup. And so while I was laying there, I thought, I'm going to put the Raynox on and just see how much closer I can get to it. I was just new to using the Raynox and playing around, seeing what I could do with some of the stuff. So I did get down, I was laying right down on the ground to do this. I do have a Nikon Z7 now, so I probably will flip out the LCD screen and not lie down on the ground anymore. But the D800 doesn't have that flip out screen, so I did lay right down on the ground to get eye level with that grasshopper. And so then the image on the right where I added the Raynox diopter, you can just see I did not change the focal length on the lens. Just by putting the Raynox on, I was able to focus it that much closer. So I was able to fill that entire frame with the head of that grasshopper.
Do you use extension tubes?
No, I don't. I just tend to stick with the diopter if I want to get much closer focusing.
And does the Raynox diopter come in something larger than 49mm?
No, it's only one size. So my tips here for extreme macro tips, hand holding, a couple of pictures here. So the first one here that we're looking at just on the left here, you can see I'm holding my camera set up There is a Raynox on the front of the Laowa lens. I've got my Wimberley F2 dual arm brackets holding the two flashes. And I've actually just got a little Wimberley plant holding a leaf. So if there was an insect on that leaf, I find this technique of, I'm supporting the camera very well, but just the body movements of, swaying back and forth that little bit, I found it very, very hard to get sharp pictures. I'd have to take a lot of pictures to get that one sharp one. But then I started I have a cooperative subject. A lot of times you can just hold the leaf or the twig that the insect might be on, or might even find a leaf on the ground you can coax the insect onto. And then if you hold that leaf in your left hand, and then the edge of that lens barrel is resting on my thumb. So I've got a pretty good stable platform because the subject is on a leaf, which is held in my hand. The camera is resting on my hand. So then I'm able to just move that leaf in little bits with my fingers until I get sharp focus. And then I can fire off the frames that I need. And a lot of times I'll use this technique for the handheld focus stacking, because I can just move that leaf in a few little increments to capture the necessary number of frames I need for my little handheld stack that I'm doing. So I use this technique for the vast majority of my macro work, especially, if there's spiders on, daisies and stuff like that. You can often just hold that flower just below the flower on the stem and just move the blossom into your lens till you get focus to capture the frames. Here's an example with the Laowa 25 millimeter 2.5 to 5x macro. Canon have their own version of a, I think it's one time to 5 times macro lens. It's quite a bit more expensive than the Laowa. The Laowa it's quite nice. It's sharp. A little bit of a learning curve because as you stop the lens down, the viewfinder will get darker. So that's where a focusing light comes in quite handy to keep your subject illuminated so you can focus on it. It's a niche lens. It's not one you're going to leave on your camera and go around every day using. I find I don't use it very often at all, but because it's so inexpensive, I think it's worth having. It does open up a whole new world of subject matter because you can start photographing some of the tiniest little insects that you can find. This little spider here, the zebra jumping spider, was just on the brickwork of my house last summer. And these guys are just tiny little things. Their body is probably about maybe 1/4 of an inch, if that. They're quite small. And this was done at 5 times life size. And you can see at 5 times life size, I was at f8. Just how narrow that depth of field is. Really, you've only got around the eyes, sharp focus, and then a little bit here is in sharp focus. The rest is pretty much out of focus. This leg here is on the same plane as the eyes there, so that's in focus as well. But you'd never know that was photographed on the brickwork of a house, because that really shallow depth of field, the background is just out of focus because there's not enough depth of field there to do it. Now you could focus stack this and get a whole lot more in focus. A lot of people do use these lenses for focus stacking. Sometimes they put them on a rail and do the focus stacking of static subjects to get a real increased depth of field. And some of the results can be just really impressive. Some people do, 200 and 300 image stacks of some of these spiders, and it's mind-boggling how amazing they look. I've never tried to do some of that work yet, but maybe eventually I will. But this was the flashes here with the Laowa twin macro light. Just because that Laowa lens, when you zoom it out to the 5 times macro, it does get a bit longer. At 2.5 times life size, it's about 3.5 inches. When you get up to about 5 times, it's probably extended close to 5, 6 inches maybe. So I just find those Laowa flashes on those flexi arms is just easier to get out where I need them to be with that longer lens. I haven't tried the Cygnus Tech with it yet. I probably will just experiment with it and see how it works. But I do like that Laowa for the extreme macro with that special lens there.
So you brought the subject to the lens instead of the lens to the subject. Is that standard technique for macro?
It is for me. I tend to do that quite often. This little spider was on the house, so I moved the lens into the spider in this case. But yeah, a lot of subject matter, like, ladybugs, spiders, some flies can be tolerant and will let you. Some flies do not let you move the leaf they may be on into the lens. But I tend to find bringing the subject matter closer to the lens, I get a much better keeper rate, and the sharp, like based on sharpness, I find I get a better keeper rate of pictures by doing that technique. Here's another, we saw the jagged ambush bug with the black background before. And these guys, like I said, they're about 1 centimeter long. This one here, it's actually on a white oxeye daisy, photographed just right along my rural road. I often wonder sometimes what the cars think when they're driving down the road, because I'm usually sitting at the side of the road and, holding a flower and bend over. They probably wonder, what's he doing? But I get a lot of these interesting sort of pictures of some of these tiny insects. This was at 5 times life size with that Laowa 25mm 5x macro lens. And again, at f8, you can just see this. I might try in the summer, this coming summer, to try some focus stacks on them to get a bit better sharpness throughout. But I did quite like this one, at f8, the eyeball is just razor sharp, and part of the antenna there is sharp. That's all sort of on the same plane of focus. But then the head's out of focus, the detail on the head there. So you can see, like, that eye doesn't sit out too much. Like the convex shape of the eye doesn't stick out too far from the sides of the animal's head. So you can just really see how shallow that depth of field is when you get up into those extreme macro lens work, and that's where the focus stacking can help. But I kind of like this one because that eye is just really sharp, and then the white background is just 2 or 3 petals from the oxeye daisy just out of focus. And this little guy is kind of a neat one. I did a single exposure on this one, and I've also done a focus stack on it as well. That's in the slide with the focus stacking. But this little fella, I found him sleeping one night on just a maple leaf out in the yard. That's called a hyperparasitic wasp. He's maybe about 1 centimeter long. So I did use my Laowa 25mm lens. I wanted to get a real close-up of the wasp's head. And this frame just happened to work out nicely as a single frame. I just made, looking through the viewfinder, just making sure I had the eyes in focus and those really interesting mandibles on the similar plane of focus as the eyes, so that at least those would be in sharp focus. And these flies have a real interesting life cycle. I found out. I didn't know anything. Most of the insects I photograph, I don't know too much about until I try to identify them and then read about their habits. But hyperparasitic wasps, they will lay eggs on the leaves of plants, and they're dependent on a caterpillar eating the eggs when they're feeding on the leaves. But the hyperparasitic wasp, in order to continue its life cycle, that egg needs to be ingested by a caterpillar that already has a specific wasp larva living inside of it, because the hyperparasitic wasp larva only feeds on a specific type of wasp larva. So it's kind of bizarre stuff when you start reading about some of these things. You know, it's like aliens all over again. Here's the little handheld focus stack section. So the first one on the left is a 3-image stack of a lady beetle larva. The center one is a 3-image stack of a leaf-footed bug. And then over on the right, we have a 4-image stack of that same hyperparasitic wasp that was in the previous slide. So the lady beetle larva was on a leaf, and I handheld the leaf, and I just moved that leaf in till the little horn-like structures here on the ladybug's back were sharp, and I shot a frame. Then I moved it a bit closer till the ones on the side came into sharp focus, fired a frame, moved it a little bit closer until the leaf was in focus, and then fired a frame. And then I just, it's a pretty simple stack, so I just put it into Photoshop and did the focus stacking in Photoshop, and it worked out quite well. If you do more complicated stacks, you might want to look at some of the third-party softwares like Helicon Focus or Zareen Stacker. I usually do real simple stacks because I don't do a lot of focus stacking. The center one with this leaf-footed bug, I had found a fallen leaf in the garden that was, we had a very dry summer in June last year, and a lot of leaves started sort of changing colors as they were dying. So I'd picked this leaf up and put it on my patio table and put the leaf bug onto it, and was able to just shoot straight down on it, and just fired off 3 frames, one for the back to be in focus, and then a little bit closer to the leaf, just getting more of the legs in focus, the head in focus, and then again a little closer yet, just to get that leaf in focus. And then the hyperparasitic wasp was a 4-image stack, and I just worked on the image stack by focusing on the mandibles, getting those in sharp focus, the eyes in sharp focus, and then a little bit further back, sort of between the main eyes and the smaller eyes up top there, and then another just focus on the eye up there. And then it was a real simple focus stack, so I just was able to assemble that in Photoshop as well.
So does the Nikon you use now have in-camera focus stacking?
The Z7 I just got will do in-camera focus stacking. It would, I don't believe it works with manual focus lenses though, because you need to have the camera needs to focus throughout the image. So I'd need to use a Nikon autofocus lens, I guess, to do that.
Right.
But you can also, I have a focusing rail. I don't use it very often at all. If you have a very cooperative subject and you wanted to use a focusing rail on it, you could very easily do that with live view on any of the cameras, and just you know, move the focusing rail in small increments to focus on the different parts that you want in focus.
And how do you handle post-production focus stacking if the bug moves while you are taking your shots?
If you do, I have done some where a picture, maybe one picture was a little bit off and the focus stack won't work that way. When I do that, then I might just, you know, find the offending picture and remove that and try to stack again and see how it works. If they move too much, you may have to redo the focus stack. I was lucky with the little wasp because it was sleeping at night, so it was fairly easy to get that focus stack. The lady beetle larva wasn't moving around too much. The leaf-footed bug was a little bit more troublesome because it was moving around a lot more than the other two here, so it took a little bit more to get that one. So when I do my post-production, I use Photoshop. As I mentioned, I don't really use Lightroom. I was already using Photoshop a lot when Lightroom came out, and I never really took to it. I didn't really want to have a whole new learning curve for something new, so I just stuck with Photoshop. But for the last couple of years anyways, I've been using luminosity masks, the ones by Tony Kuiper. He is now up to a TK8 action panel. And if you're unfamiliar with how the luminosity masks work, I recommend just, putting that into YouTube, searching. If you want to look up the Tony Kuiper stuff specifically, you could go to YouTube, put in TK8 action panel, Tony Kuiper, or you could search Sean Bagshaw or David Kelly. They do lots of tutorials based on the TK8 action panel. And I just find them really easy to use. I can do a lot of different things I couldn't do before. And for the price of them, I don't think you can beat it. I looked today and it's $29 US. And I find you can just do so much with them. The center one here, the TK8 multi-mask, you can create your masks based on color, based on tone. You can fine tune them and tweak them. And then you can, apply a levels or a curves adjustment or a saturation adjustment to those masks if you want to. The TK8CX panel, a lot of these are just one-click shortcuts to get you to different things in Photoshop that you might already be using, but that you have to, click here, click there, and click here to get to where you want to go to. But a lot of it here, you can just click and away you go. One of the things I do like is when you're in this panel, if you in this little where the cursor is down here, if you click that TK with the little drop down arrow, you get a bunch of different actions that you can do. There's a make it glow action, which will give a real nice enhancement to warm colors in the scene. And if it does it a little bit too much, you can just reduce the opacity down to taste to where you think it should be. You can do paint in contrast with either a black brush, a white brush, or a neutral gray brush. I find that quite handy. I'll actually use that a lot in some of my bird photography. I'll paint in some contrast, maybe just on the bird to make it just pop out just a little bit more from the scene. I'd use the paint in contrast quite a bit as well in some of my landscape work to just give a bit more contrast to some of the rocks or something, or maybe the clouds in the sky. I find it's really, really handy. I use it on every single picture I do now, pretty much. Here's some examples using the Laowa wide angle macro, the 15mm 1:1. As I mentioned near the beginning, you can focus down to about 4.7 millimeters from the front element. This is another lens, sort of like that 25mm 2.5 to 5x macro, where when you stop the aperture down, the viewfinder will get darker. At 15mm, it's not too bad to be able to see through to focus. Yeah, and it's fully manual. You have a ring for focusing and you have a ring for the aperture, which is almost like looks like a focus ring, but it dials in the aperture on the lens. But for each of these pictures, the large male bullfrog and the water snake, the front of the lens is probably 1 inch away from each of these subjects. And you can see when you get in so close like that, the subject can really dominate the picture, but you still see the habitat that they're in. And I really like creating those kind of pictures. The nice thing with this 15mm macro, I don't use filters a lot in my macro, but for the wide angle macro, I do. And both these pictures, I did use my the Stingray warming filter I have in the thin mount, and there's no vignetting at all in these pictures. And it takes, some of the glare off the lily pad leaves, a little bit of glare off the skin of the frog. And again, here, similar, takes a bit of glare off those lily pad leaves and a little bit of the glare off the scales of the snake. I have used this lens in a Ewa marine housing for doing some over under frog pictures as well, which is a little trickier to maneuver, but it gives you another perspective because that real wide angle, you can get down, half under the water. You can see half the frog underwater and half the frog above water, which is kind of a neat way to do it. Here's a couple more examples using the lens. Both these were created in Ontario's Algonquin Provincial Park. These are both small subjects. The toad is probably about 2 inches, and this little green frog would be about the same. And the toad's just in a woodland setting, but getting down really low with that wide angle lens. It was quite dark in the forest as I had bumped up to ISO 1600 on my D800, and just handheld. These type of pictures, I'm not using a flash on. I'm just using natural light for these type of pictures. It gives you a nice sense of the environment though. And then this little green frog was in late September. So we got a bit of mist coming off the lake because the temperatures are starting to cool down. The evenings are cold. This was in the morning. And again, just laid down right on the beach I was at and just was able to get this frog nicely in the foreground with that 15mm lens, and then still be able to see out across that lake. The lake here is, it's called Lake Travers in Algonquin Provincial Park. One thing I like to sort of remind people when doing macro is, paralleling the subject. So if you're photographing, say, these ferns, a butterfly, some details on the surface of Georgian Bay in winter, or even this bumblebee, you can see how the antennas of the bumblebee are in focus. The wings of the butterfly, they're all equally in focus. The fern frond is, sharp from all four corners, as is the ice crystals. And that's by keeping, the back of the camera or the sensor plane parallel to your subject. If you were, if you're a little bit off on the bumblebee, you might have one antenna in sharp focus, the other one might be out of focus. And then that's going to have a little bit of an odd look. So I made sure when I framed this one up that I was positioned so that the antennas were both in focus. And similarly with the these fern fronds, just making sure I was parallel to that fern frond so that I would be able to capture sharpness corner to corner. It wouldn't be very nice, if you had all this, sharpness through here and then over here you got blurry. It would be a distraction in the picture. And the butterflies, I like when their wings are open or their wings are closed. I like to get parallel to those wings so that I get them in sharp focus and you don't have, the tips of the wings are out of focus. This male monarch, he had opened his wings up fully, so they were pretty well on a flat plane. So I was able to get those wings in equal sharpness. The ice crystals here on Georgian Bay, it was tripod mounted, that picture. And, just the camera's pointed straight down and just making sure it's sort of parallel to the ice surface to get that nice equal focusing throughout the image. And for something like that, you can always just take a step back and look at the camera and just see, is that parallel to the ice? And just adjust it if you need to. Here's just a nasturtium leaf out of the garden last summer. It was starting to die off and it had these nice patterns in it. The main leaf was kind of going yellowy, but around the veins it was still green. So I really liked the way that looked, and I put the center of all the veins just down here in the lower right so that all those veins would kind of lead you into the picture. And again, this one was handheld using the Cygnus Tech diffuser and the Godox flash, and just making sure the camera was parallel to that leaf. A couple more examples, just some ice bubbles or some bubbles trapped in the frozen surface of Georgian Bay up near Parry Sound. Again, just making sure that the sensor plane is parallel to the ice surface, just to make sure we're getting some nice good sharpness throughout. And one little trick I do sometimes when I have these real nice icy situations, you might have some little bits of snow or bits of ice that are kind of problematic on the surface. And sometimes I'll just put the palm of my hand onto the ice and just let the warmth of my hand sort of melt it and just sort of move it around. And that'll just sort of eliminate any of those sort of little elements on the surface of the ice that could be a distraction. With the ice being so cold, your hand's going to melt it. And as soon as you take your hand away, it's going to freeze pretty much right away anyways. The lichen over here is just on a white paper birch tree out in my yard. And I think this was the very first picture I took with the Laowa 2X, the Laowa 100 millimeter 2X macro lens. It was tripod mounted. I just wanted to play around with it and see what just how good the sharpness was at f/22, and just to test out the lens. And I was in on these lichens at 2 times life size, mounted on a tripod. And I was quite happy with it. You know, some of the lichens down here, they're out of focus, but really the main interest is this little cluster here, which I quite liked. Some of the macro subjects you'll find, you know, they can be right at your feet when you're out, you know, walking around, taking your pictures and stuff like that. And just always look down at your feet. Then you even the trail that you're walking on, there might be a couple of interesting exposed roots or just some details on some roots. This little section of pink granite with these lichens was just on the shoreline of Georgian Bay on the trail I was walking during some early spring ice breakup on Georgian Bay. The snow had pretty much melted on the on land, but the ice in the bay was just starting to break up and chunks of ice coming into shore. But I just noticed this real nice arrangement of pink granite and the lichen. So I did tripod mount this, and I used my a neutral polarizer, the Stingray one, just to help cut down some of the glare off of the rock. Even though there wasn't much, the polarizer did help to cut some of that glare and bring a little bit of more color out of the pink granite. This one here was photographed in I have a lot of farm fields around me and they get flooded. Some of them have some small little ponds. This was just some interesting patterns I had seen on the surface of the pond, and the 3 little ice bubbles trapped in the ice, and just the lines creating some really interesting shapes, and just using the 100 macro. Probably about 1.5 feet away from the ice for this picture here. And then tripod mounted. I do find a lot of times when photographing some of this real delicate ice, I've got to splay the tripod legs out quite a bit, because that ice can be not paper thin, but not too much thicker than paper thin. And it can, just stepping on the ground a couple of feet away in springtime can be enough to move the ground enough that you might get some cracking on the ice. So these type of ice patterns, you got to be really careful about where you're stepping and placing your tripod, because the ice is just so delicate. But there's so many interesting details and patterns that can be found in spring when you get, you know, the warm days, and then the snow and the ponds will melt a bit, and then at night it gets cold, things freeze over again. So you get out there early in the morning, you can find a lot of this real interesting subjects. And this was done on a clear blue sky day. I did throw a coat over the scene just to kind of shade it a little bit. So we're getting a bit of the blue cast from the blue sky above coming through on the ice as well. I do some flower abstracts. They're kind of neat to see what sort of patterns and shapes you can find in the flowers. All the flower abstracts I did last year was using the handheld with the Godox flash, the Laowa 100 millimeter macro, and then that Cygnus Tech diffuser. So the first one here, this is just a bull thistle blossom. And to do this, I handheld the blossom, and very carefully, because bull thistles are quite thorny. and just slowly move the flower in just until the tips on the flower came into sharp focus. And at f16, you can see just there's not a lot of depth of field in there. The lens would have been at probably would have been close to 2 times life size, maybe 1.5 times life size for this one. So you can see just how shallow that depth of field is, even at f16 when you get in that close. But I just like the way it's the sort of radiating pattern of the little filaments in the flower. And this is just a cosmos blossom. I planted a whole bunch of cosmos and zinnia, try to bring in a lot of butterflies this year for doing some butterfly photography. So I had some cosmos had some real nice tones to them. This one with all the different tones of pink I found quite nice. And again, this is with the Godox flash handheld with the 100 macro. And again, just I was holding the blossom just right underneath the blossom in the palm of my hand. Put the stem down between your 2 middle fingers there, just hold it, and then just move that in until it's in sharp focus. And I just, again, make sure that those petals are kind of on the same plane of as your sensor. So you'll get some nice sharpness throughout all the petals. And then this little zinnia blossom, I quite close on this one, probably at the 2 times life size. And I was f16, but I really wanted to make sure I got some nice sharpness and the little bristles on those little yellow parts of the flower. And then the center of the flower is up over here. And I just kind of like the way the colors just pop in that scene. So when you're doing the macro stuff, you don't have to just look at trying to photograph the whole flower. Look at the details of the flower and then just get in really close and see what you can create by getting in really close on some of those details in the flower. I do a lot of frogs and toads in the springtime up this way. I find if you live in the Great Lakes region of North America, the best time to do frogs and toads is in spring when the frogs all emerge from hibernation. They'll come out and they will congregate at their breeding ponds. A lot of them are just vernal pools, and they will congregate in vast numbers. And I find that is the best time. And if you do so at night, I find they're a lot more approachable. When I first started doing frogs and toads, I would try doing it during daylight hours, and they would literally see you coming from a good distance away, and they would just go quiet and they wouldn't start again because they would always see me standing around the pond. So I found by going at night, just a little headlamp and a small flashlight for focusing on them, and then by wearing chest waders and actually getting right in the pond and getting right down on the frog's level, I started to have a lot more success photographing them. My settings for photographing the frogs and toads at night is usually ISO 100, an aperture of f16, and my shutter speed is about a 60th of a second. I do find for my own macro needs, when I go to greater magnification for insects and that, I do need to go with a faster shutter speed, up around maybe 1/200th of a second, maybe a 1/125th of a second. I found doing them at a 60th of a second, I was just getting a bit of movement from my own, the way I was shooting. So by going a faster shutter speed with the greater macro, I was getting much better results. So what we got here, the green frog, all 3 of these have their vocal sacs out. Green frogs, they're a little trickier to photograph with their vocal sac inflated. I do find the more you go out, the more you learn their habits. So with the green frog, if you see their body starting to inflate, they're starting to inhale air that they're going to use to make their call and inflate that vocal sac. So if you see their body getting bigger and bigger, then you know they're about to call. So you can sort of get ready in position and wait. Over on the right, the American toads, when they sing, their vocal sac is usually open for almost a good 10 seconds. So you got lots of time to compose your shot and get your images. And a lot of times you can actually imitate the American toads and get them to call back to you, which is kind of fun. Similar with the gray tree frogs, if you can imitate them, you can entice them into calling as well during the breeding season. I've had them where they've been so taken with vocalizing that I've held them in the palm of my hand, and they just keep singing when they're in the palm of my hand. They just don't stop. But all of these, I'm getting down as low as I possibly can in the pond to photograph them. The gray tree frog in particular, I had to get my elbows right on the pond substrate so that I was holding the camera almost at the water level to shoot up at this gray tree frog sitting on the little log that was in the pond. You can try doing some creative type
Flash on
work with
those,
your Mac.
sorry, on
What's that?
the frogs
Yeah.
that were taken at night, did you use a flash?
Yes. Yeah. Flash. I always use flash for the frogs at night. Yeah. So this little fella here, Cayman scorpion, I photographed him just over the Christmas holidays when I was down south. I found a few different ones. So this, the natural light one, it's actually taken at night with a flash, the Cygnus Tech diffuser. You can see there's no harsh shadows around it at all, just beautifully diffused light. And the way I would look for these guys at night when I'd walk around was just a little ultraviolet flashlight, which I had purchased one. I knew the scorpions were down there where I was going. So I purchased a little $12 ultraviolet flashlight off of Amazon. And I would use that to look for the scorpions at night. And they just a real intense glow when the ultraviolet light goes over them. So one night I went looking for them and decided, I've got to get one of these guys just using the ultraviolet light. So I set my tripod up, framed it up, and just natural light held the ultraviolet flashlight over it. I had to go to an ISO of 400. I left my at f16 for good depth of field, and then it was 13 seconds. And these guys don't move around that much unless you bug them. They're really just sitting there waiting for prey to come to them. So they're quite fascinating, I find, to photograph them. A lot of times they're under debris and stuff like that. So getting them out in the open, pretty well got to look for them at night to get them out in the open. A lot of times when you're looking for your insects, you'll find you can have a lot of opportunities for camouflage. This little fella here was called a running crab spider. And it was just on the silver maple tree out in my front yard. It's covered with lots of lichen. I've never seen one of these spiders before. He was actually, I didn't know he was there until I sort of walked by the tree and I thought I saw something move. So look a little bit closer and then I realized, hey, there's a spider on the tree here. And it was a different one I've never seen. So I ran in the house, grabbed my gear and came out to get some pictures of them. Again, this was with the Cygnus Tech diffuser. Some nice diffuse, even lighting throughout. And that spider just really blends in on the bark with the lichen. And then over here, we have one of the goldenrod crab spider. This is a female. The females get, this is big. The body's probably maybe ½ inch. Like the body from the eyes to the back of the abdomen would be about maybe, yeah, probably smaller than an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch. But the females are that size. The males are quite tiny. But this one was just on some wild carrot. Some people like to call it Queen Anne's lace. It just grows along the roadside ditches here quite abundantly in the summer months. And I just thought, this crab spider, she just blends in so well on the flowers. And that's a lot of these spiders. They blend in so well on the flowers. They just sit there and just wait for prey to come to them, whether it's a bee, flies, or maybe a small butterfly coming down to pollinate the flower, and then the spider grabs them. That's a lot of times too. When I see a lot of flies that are actually caught on the blossoms by the spiders. Some sort of interesting behaviors you can sometimes come across when you're out looking. This was captured down in Grand Cayman this past December. I've never seen these before. They almost look sort of like a box elder bug that we have up here in Ontario. I believe they're also throughout much of North America, I think, the box elder type bugs. But this is called a St. Andrew's cotton stainer, a real bright sort of orangey red. And every now and then I'd see them in these big clusters. And there's a specific type of seed pod or fruit from a tree. And when it falls, these cotton stainers, they all tend to cluster over it. And I think what they're doing is they're feeding on the outer layer of the seed pod, because when they're gone, all I see is a little pile of seeds, and the rest of the that seed pod is gone. So it's kind of interesting behavior of them when you start looking in close to some of these guys. And then over here, this was literally just outside my front door last summer, a female wolf spider carrying all her babies on her back. And I'd never seen this before at all. And I saw her about 2 or 3 times. And then I guess the babies will hang out on the mother's back until they reach their first molt. And then when they do their molt, they scatter off and start life on their own. But I thought it's just real fascinating. All these little spiders just clinging to the mother's back. There's probably more than maybe about 100 spiders on her back. And this was done with the Laowa twin macro light. It was the only one I had at the time when I discovered it, with the Laowa 100 macro. And I'm probably in about 1.5 times life size to zoom in on this. I can't remember if it was at 2 times life size or not, but it would have been in 1.5 to 2 times, somewhere in that range, just to get a nice cluster. And I didn't really care too much. I did take a frame where you can see the whole spider and all the legs. But then I thought, no, the subject here is all these babies. So I wanted to just get as much of those babies on her back in the frame as I possibly could. So I just allowed myself to clip out or cut the legs off and let that cluster of baby spiders be the real image. So there we've got lots of some ideas and things to look for in the field. Here we got a few extra little pictures, just a common garter snake in Algonquin Provincial Park with the Laowa 100 millimeter, the Cygnus Tech diffuser. Here we have a headshot of a Grand Cayman anole, beautiful little lizard. This one here was probably about 5 inches long, head to tail. I was able to get in fairly close. I did find these guys very hard to photograph with flash. All of these pictures were done with flash. But the anoles I found particularly tricky to get with the flash. It's almost like when I pressed the shutter, they knew the flash was going to fire and they would take off before the picture was even finished its exposure. And then this little grasshopper here is called a grizzly grasshopper. I had actually found it on the handle of my wheelbarrow in the backyard. So I had just coaxed it onto a small little branch, held the branch up. And again, I wanted to get that sort of dramatic black background. So I just made sure I did it from a standing position so that the flash had nothing to fall on. By the time the light would have hit the grass below, it would not render as anything in the picture. So I'd get the black background. And I didn't worry so much about the antennas or the abdomen. I did a headshot of this one as well, but I kind of like this one better, where you could see the main grasshopper's body. And I just sort of like the camouflage look of the various tones of green on them and that. I just like this composition quite a bit. And then a little honeybee just on a type of yellow flower that we have in the garden that grows sort of along our fence line. Again, this one here, I held the flower and just moved that flower in a little bit closer to fire off a few frames of this bee. This is a green darner dragonfly, an abstract. And this actually won an honorable mention in Wild Art Photographer of the Year competition just last year. This is the only picture in the whole presentation that was done with my older Nikon macro. I did this one with the Nikon 100 macro with the Nikon 6T diopter lens on the front to get greater magnification. And I had encountered this green darner. You know, the larva had just crawled out of the lake. It was emerged from the chrysalis and was just waiting to dry off before it would fly away. And after creating, you know, some headshots, some full body shots, I just started playing around with different abstracts. And I just kind of liked this one with just the abdomen and the wing atop the cross of the composition. And then this, the little monarch on the same type of yellow flowers as the honeybee over here. And I just sort of positioned myself looking a little bit up to capture some of the trees and the blue sky behind. It was with the Cygnus Tech diffuser as well, just to get some nice diffused light. And I find that Cygnus Tech diffuser diffuses the light quite nicely, that sometimes those backgrounds can come out a little bit more. If I had used like the grasshopper up here was done with I believe the dual flash that I have, which is a little bit brighter, and it doesn't diffuse quite as well. So the background goes black much easier. I believe that's what I used on this one. And then this one I did use the Cygnus Tech diffuser, and that background did come up a little bit more. And that would wrap up.
We have a bunch of folks who want to know, how do you get so close without disturbing your subject? Do you ever try to capture it or catch it?
A lot of times it's finding the cooperative ones. For the frogs and toads at night, it also depends on the species of frog. I find leopard frogs are very skittish, and I find them hard to approach in the ponds that I go to up here. Spring peepers are fairly tricky to approach. The gray tree frogs, American toads, are much more tolerant. We do have some chorus frogs up this way, and they are equally difficult to photograph. I don't have too many of them done with digital. I used to do a lot of them when I did film. I haven't seemed to have too much luck, or my patience for them is worn out and I don't do too much. The insects, a lot of times the spiders, like the crab spiders on the blossoms, they're not going to run away too much. And if they do see you and they leave the top of the flower and go underneath, if you just sit down there and wait, they will come right back up, and then you can work on them. Some things are quite skittish. You know, some bees are skittish and will fly away. Robber flies, I've had good luck and bad luck with robber flies. Sometimes they can be really cooperative. I find sometimes at night, like as evening's coming, if you find some of those bugs, they've kind of settled in for the night, they can be easier to photograph. Sometimes in light rain, a lot of the bugs will hide out, you know, under leaves and stuff. So they're a little bit more approachable, because if it's raining out, they're not going to really fly away too much. But a lot of times when I do find some subjects, I will fire a few images right away. And then if they're cooperative, I will hold the leaf and then, you know, try to move them in much closer to get the real pictures I'm after.
And do you shoot more critters at night because they're more active? Like, how do you find them? Do you go back to known locations?
The frogs and toads, there's a couple of specific ponds I know that are very productive. So I go to those only at night. The insects I photograph at night are usually just in my yard, just walking around the yard. Sometimes at the ponds at night where the frogs are, there's lots of six-spotted fishing spiders that can be photographed that are out. Yeah, but I would say for the insects, I probably find more insects during the day than I do at night for my photography.
And this is going back to one of your first images of a spider. Does
Mhm.
using f/22 on a macro lens really mean much versus getting more color fringing, etc.? Maybe letting in more light at f4 might be better. Maybe stacking the spider would make it more in focus too.
Yeah, well, if you shoot at like f4 or something like that, or even f8 and do a stack, you will get a lot more in sharp focus. For the way I shoot and my own tolerance, I don't have a lot of patience for shooting big, focus stacks of 20 pictures or so. A lot of times I'm quite happy when I get the f16 or f22 pictures, and the depth of field is a little shallow when you get in closer. But to me, as long as the eyes are in focus, I'm pretty well fine with the way the rest of it falls. I don't mind the whole spider not being in focus.
And do you use the flash in manual mode?
No, on my D500, the Godox is in the ITTL mode, I believe. And then I'll just, if I have to adjust the flash compensation, I can just adjust that up or down as need be.
And do you up the ISO for movement?
Yeah, I do. I found when I started doing some of the insects, I'd bump up the ISO to anywhere from maybe ISO 250 to ISO 400, depending. And then I do the flash up as well, maybe 1/25th of a second, or sometimes 1/200th, 1/250th of a second.
And how do you turn off your focusing light after you focus?
Well, I'm using a small little flashlight as my focusing, and the flash overpowers the flashlight. So I don't turn off the flashlight I use for focusing. I don't use any focusing lights like built into the camera. Those are always turned off. I use a little small mini mag flashlight in the palm of my hand while I'm holding the lens barrel. And that's what I use for focusing on. And then the flash overpowers that. So you don't even know you've used a flashlight for focusing.
And would the wasp shot be a lot of work, or can the camera autofocus stack the wasp's front feelers? Like if you wanted to get all of its antennas in focus, and how many shots would you do to get all the antennas in focus?
Oh, I've never tried anything like that sort of a intense focus stack. If you had an autofocusing lens, you probably could. Those antenna do extend quite far away from the wasp's head. If the antennas were, more off to the side, you could get through with a lot less pictures. But the way they're positioned right now, you probably would need quite a few pictures to get all of that in sharp focus, I would think.
Right.
Like I said, I've never tried any of those real deep focus stacks.
Have you tried snowflakes? Do you have to keep the glass cold for the snowflake to land on to capture before it melts?
I have never done snowflakes. I would like to try doing some with my 5x macro. If I was going to do it, I would probably try. I know some people have used little microscope slides, and they've caught the snowflakes on like a towel or a glove, and then just try and drop that on. You don't want to pick it up because you'll melt it, but try to somehow drop that onto the microscope slide. And then you can put that behind, or you can put, you could put some blue Bristol board behind if you wanted to get a blue background. You could go black if you wanted to. But
And
yeah,
sorry, the frozen pond, was that photo cropped?
no, no, I don't. I try not to crop. Usually my pictures the framing is as they were done in camera. On rare occasions, I might do a minor crop, but I much prefer to get the framing the way I want it in camera. To me, it's just one less step to do in Photoshop or Lightroom if you have Lightroom to do.
And then would using a telezoom with a 1.4x and in crop mode and zoom to 800 millimeter or 1200 millimeter and crop in post, do you think more of the eye and head being more in focus? Because I think that might have been a specific question about a specific shot. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah, maybe 800 millimeters. That's a pretty big lens to be doing that at.
So Gary, if you want to expand on that, I think that was about a specific image. And then if you have to kill a bug, so it'll be easier to take pictures of, what do you use to kill it painlessly and still make the bug look alive?
I've never killed any bugs to do any of my macro. Like I don't find them in the field, kill them and do them. I believe some people will use, I did do reading on this. I think some of them will use isopropyl alcohol or even nail polish remover. What I have done for some specific stuff is you can order dead bugs off of, you can find them on Etsy. There's a few stores on Etsy where you can pick up stuff like that. And if I do that, I look for, ethically sourced ones where the insects are maybe farmed for the insect collecting trade. So I've done that for a few really colorful types of beetles or wood boring type of beetles, some weevils. There's a lot of really colorful weevils from Indonesia. And then all you have to do is and you just look on YouTube for how to do it, but you need to relax the dead insect. And then you need to pin out the legs so that they're in sort of a natural position. And I've done that for some, and put them onto some bark or a flower, position them appropriately so they still look natural. So I've done that. I've ordered some ethically sourced dead insects, pinned them for some different types of work like that, but I've never gone out and caught and killed or chilled. Some people like to chill their bugs as well. Like if you caught a spider, you put it in the freezer for maybe 30 seconds, it cools down, and then you set it up and sort of wait for it to warm back up, come to life, and start firing some pictures. I haven't done any of that type of work either. I just work with what I tend to find. Sometimes if I get a spider on a stick, it can be moving my fingers around quite a bit so the spider isn't starting to crawl onto me. But that's about the extent of what I've done.
How far away were you from the snake when you took that shot?
My first few frames, I was fairly far back, and I would just slowly move my way in closer. So that was framed as is. So there's no cropping to get that framing. I would have probably been within about, I'm going to say 3 to 4 inches of the snake, probably.
Why D500 for macro? Is it because you have a larger subject than FX camera?
No, it's just I really like the D500, and like I said, the crop sensor, it makes the 100 millimeter macro lens a little bit longer. It becomes effectively 150 millimeter macro lens, so I get a little bit longer focal length with the same working distance as I would have if I had that same lens on my D800.
And when you mentioned using the 15 millimeter macro, was that the 0D lens?
No, I do have, I have a Laowa 12 millimeter 0D lens that I use for a lot of my landscape work. The 15 millimeter macro lens, I think that was one of the first lenses Laowa made. And they really do make some great lenses. The optics are razor sharp. They're fully manual. So if you're really accustomed to autofocus, you have a little bit of a learning curve going back into a fully manual lens. But for me, I think it's a real quick learning curve, and the optics are outstanding. The Laowa 12 millimeter 0D lens, I've used that for some architecture work that I've done. And if you keep the lens perfectly square with the world, all your walls, everything remains straight. So it's fabulous for that. In landscape work, I find when I'm shooting, ocean scenes or large lake scenes like over Lake Superior or Georgian Bay, the horizon line doesn't bow like it does. When I use my Nikon 16 to 35, I will see if I point the lens down so there's not too much sky in the picture, you will see a little bit of distortion in the horizon line. And I do have to apply a lens correction to straighten that up. With the Laowa 12mm, there is none of that problem. Everything remains straight.
Do you try to shoot subjects in shade? Do you avoid bright sunlight?
I don't do too much work in bright sunlight, but when you're doing the macro work with the flash diffuser, the sunlight doesn't really matter because the exposure is becoming, the light is becoming what the flash is producing. So like on this slide right here, you see the bumblebee on the, that's on a sedum flower. That was under bright sunlight, but it almost looks like it was, photographed with natural light on an overcast day.
Before using your current lighting technique, did you get bad highlights when using circle lighting?
Like a ring light, I've never used a ring light. I really do not like ring lights at all. Especially, if you're photographing an insect, the ring light's going to give you some nice even lighting. If there's no diffusion on it, it's going to give you spectral highlights because it would still be a harsh light. In the case of frogs, using a ring light, you're going to see that, bright circle of light, like a complete circle with a hole like a donut in the frog's eye. And to me, it's completely unnatural. When I do my frogs, I want to see just, one highlight in the eye. I don't even like seeing two highlights. If I've ever photographed frogs or toads with a dual flash system, a lot of times I'll clone out one of the highlights in the eye. I had read in a book quite a while ago that I can't remember who the author was, but they had just made a comment about how using a single flash for some subjects is what you want to use, like such as frogs, because our planet only has one sun. So there really should be only one highlight in the eye instead of two, because we don't have two suns on our planet. So that kind of sort of stuck with me. So I think it makes kind of sense to some subjects, you really only want that single highlight in the eye, like with the frogs. Insect eyes don't tend to give you a catch light in the eye similar to what you would get with a frog. So I think a dual flash system, you can get away with that a lot easier with insects.
And then this is a follow-up to that other question that was
Okay.
really specific. Regarding my telemacro, Olympus 200 to 800 millimeter with a 1.4x can focus down to 4 foot. Then do 2 times crop on camera on micro 4.3s, and you are zooming into like 1800 millimeter. If the bug's eye sticks out, as in your photo, where the eye was sharp, but the area near the eye was out of focus, I think it's telemacro can get you deeper sharpness, and maybe cropping in post might be a little sharper than using a razor thin depth with a straight macro lens.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, sometimes you can back away a little bit more working distance, get a little more in focus, and then crop in if you want to. There is the Micro Four Thirds camera do give you a little bit better depth of field than full frame or crop sensor cameras do as well.
I think that's it for our questions tonight. So we wanted to thank everybody for joining us tonight for our webinar. And we definitely want to thank Andrew McLachlan for presenting tonight on macro photography.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.